Hey, Tom. Hey, Barry.
Hello. How's everybody today?
Don't know yet. They're not here yet.
They're absent. Everybody's absent today.
They're 20 seconds late.
Yeah, and I decided to take a bathroom break before we started.
Well, gotta confess, there are times where I turn off the video and have to take a bathroom break during the session.
Yeah, the older I get, the shorter the intervals are.
Uh, let's see if we can muster a crew here today.
Hello, everybody.
Tom, how's Ecuador?
Super. Always nice here.
What is your latitude, by the way?
Oh, God. But we're in a place where it's spring-like weather the whole year round. It's quite unusual.
Are you actually in the tropics?
It's subtropical. We're 1,500 meters up. I can remember that part. In the Andes Mountains.
You're in Ecuador, aren't you?
Yeah. Mhm.
Ecuador is named after the equator. The equator runs through Ecuador.
Right. You're correct. But we're a little bit north of the equator, but almost every day ends at 6:30. So
Yeah.
we get a 12-hour day. But being it that we're 1,500 meters up, we get this great weather the whole year round.
That's pretty cool, literally. Hey, Stace.
Where are you guys?
Oh, I haven't said. I am in Washington State in the upper left corner of the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
I'm in the suburbs of Boston,
Ah,
I'm in New York.
upstate New York, a little bit.
upstate New York.
A little bit.
People where I am don't call it upstate. I'm 20 minutes outside of New York City.
Well, anybody living in the countryside or in cities?
I
Suburbs.
am 8 miles from the nearest gas station, 15 miles from the nearest supermarket, 20 miles from the nearest town.
You're on an island, aren't you?
Yep.
Is it a true island with the actual bridge, or is it like a spit of land?
There is an actual bridge. If there weren't a bridge, it's not drivable most of the year. So it's like a very wet marsh. I guess that's redundant. But yes, it is an island.
I think hovercrafts would be the solution.
Yes, exactly. I ought to get one. You're right. Because if I actually have a hovercraft or a jetpack, it's only like 8 miles, 3 miles to 8 miles, depending on where I want to go across the water to the mainland. It's about 3 miles to the closest spot, but 8 miles to the closest large city.
Well, that'd be easy. Did you see that video of this guy who made a craft where he stands on it and it just goes up in the air?
Yeah.
You see that one? Incredible.
There was one that was a guy racing a sprinter on a track, and the sprinter was running hurdles, and the other guy had this things. They were actually on his arms. The jets were on his arms, and he was racing the sprinter and flying over the hurdles.
Wow, I haven't seen that. I've seen the flying bathtub. Have you seen that one?
Not that one, though.
Well, they have like 6 propellers, kind of like a drone, horizontal like that. And the guy gets inside a bathtub, a lightweight bathtub, and takes off, goes to the store, goes across the countryside a little bit, goes in, parks in a parking lot, goes in a store, buys some food, gets back in, and drives back. And he made the whole thing and has like a piece of foam underneath to land on.
Yeah.
But the bathtub is really just a place to sit in, you know. But it seems like the hovercraft and some of these others can be done probably cheaper than a car. I would think way cheaper, actually.
It's a fiberglass bathtub, isn't it? Not a metal one.
To be light. Yeah.
It could be fiberglass. It depends.
Yeah. Fiberglass is by definition about the lightest tub that you can make. That.
Yeah.
So,
You don't have to, you could take a bath in it while you're flying, I guess, but he didn't do that.
Then it would be heavy. Water is heavy.
It's
But
dense.
I hope we can make some here. We have a big carpentry shop and we can make anything. We just need the right engineers. It'd be really, because where I live, it's in the mountains, and to have a flying thing that you wouldn't have to worry about the wind, because the wind could blow you up against the mountain. That would be the way to get around in Ecuador.
I saw a guy had used a small hovercraft to take down a hornet's nest. There was a hornet nest that had been built on his antenna that was mounted at the side of his house. And what he did is he put pheromones on the blades, and then he just hovered it right next to the hornet's nest. And the hornets would come out attracted by the pheromone and get smacked by the blades. And it took him a week, but he wiped out all the hornets just hovering this. This
Seems extreme.
hovercraft.
So normally we have around the check-ins before we bring up the number of possible topics here, but we already have one. Tom is going to finish his discussion of Mofufuism, I believe. So we'll see how that concludes. But anybody want to check in first before we dive in?
Is anyone else here besides the four of us? I can't see.
No, just
It's
four of
only
us
the
right
four
now.
of us for the moment.
Okay.
So I'm out of jail as of this morning.
Well, I'm sure you're about to do something else that'll land you there again, Barry.
All I have to do is post a piece of scholarship and I'm back in jail.
You're a repeat offender, okay?
And the same item, not even a replica of it, the actual item from 2 weeks ago. got
Exactly.
reflagged a second time.
That's recidivism.
Well, it's a double jeopardy and no due process.
Oh, you land
I was,
in the kingdom of Facebook.
Yeah.
just got out of jail the other day for posting a video of those Republican senators bringing up the criminality of Fauci. So I posted that and got put right into jail.
Yeah, that's probably fake news would be the category.
No, that these guys were standing. These are actual senators who were making these comments. So it's not, that can't be fake. That was in front of the government building and everything.
Fake allegations then.
The allegations are fake, but the actual video is probably real.
Correct.
So
I don't think the allegations are fake, but I can't say for sure because you can't trust any of the sources of information 100%.
Oh, wait, so you're saying the allegations are real, but they're unfounded. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no. That wouldn't make that much sense. But no, I'm saying that I'm somebody who thinks Fauci's not a hero, he's a villain. And there's a lot of evidence that seems to substantiate that. But like everything, I'm somebody who's not always I'm not 100% certain. So I leave a little space for being wrong or corrected. But it seems to me that way.
Well, I asked my colleague Barsoom Twerk, the anthropologist from Mars, and he came back to me and said, "Far be it from me to use you fruck such tumid balderdash."
Well, he often is very judgmental, I noticed, but doesn't really offer solutions, just has his judgments.
So I'm curious about something. I'm curious about why you would think that like a person that like for his whole life was working as a scientist to, to save people's lives basically, would fall into something like that, to do something illegal like that. I'm just talking just human nature, because for me, I tend to notice that people that live with integrity don't usually lose it unless they have a drug problem, a gambling problem, something really bizarre happens to them. Usually if somebody's an above board person, which he was hailed as that in the beginning, they don't really change.
It's really hard to say, to make a generalization in this particular case. It's hard to understand why people do such horrible things. Sometimes out of desperation, sometimes because they think they're certain they can get away with it. And so it's really, you can speculate forever on it.
Wait,
Why
wait,
anybody-
wait. let me understand your position on this. You're saying that the allegations that the Republican senators are levying have credibility? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right.
The same Republicans who've been spouting like months and months and hundreds and thousands of lies about the election?
Well, I think that even an idiot can sometimes have some useful information.
Oh, interesting. So yeah, I'm with Stacy. So what specific allegation do you think has plausibility?
Well, I think his the the fact that he's if his what's the word for it? He's an owner of some of these vaccines and has the damn the
Okay, so you're saying he's a shareholder of some of these companies that developed these vaccines?
yeah. Also, they made it illegal to do that. What is called the use of function to make really bad viruses. They made that illegal, and then what he did was he went around that by contracting Wuhan lab to do it, which was against the law in spirit.
Oh.
And that I didn't like too much, and that's why Wuhan lab is financed by him and others from the United States, and they were making the thing that they say didn't escape. And now a lot of scientists are coming. Oh no, I froze. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can.
We can hear you, but your video is frozen.
Yeah, I don't know what happens, but that happened before, or even worse the other time. But anyway, there's so much questionable things about this man Fauci that I don't understand how you people are not aware of it, because it's all over the internet. But and
I'll
like I
speak
said,
for, it's not that I'm not aware. I just think it's not really founded, just because like those things that you mentioned, I probably have ownership in certain stocks, or if somebody were doing something that I thought were for a good cause, I would probably invest there. I don't, I just, I just don't think that there's enough support to even make a statement like that. And again, in the beginning, everybody loved him, whether you were Republican or Democrat. Everybody said the same thing about him on a personal note, how much integrity he has. Now, the same people, as Sam pointed out, who have come up with like the craziest things that we've seen in real time. We've seen them say one thing to one audience, then say the exact opposite to another. Why would I believe those people about somebody that has shown integrity? I'm just looking from the human nature point of view.
well, I don't know what you mean by human nature, but and regardless, he has gone back and forth on so many things he said. His whole history is very questionable. There's so much real evidence and bad connections he has, and I don't see how you could trust that guy, and why you would love somebody like that.
Well, I don't love him because I don't know him. But if I have him in a room, as opposed, I won't even mention some other names, I would probably trust him more. And as far as his changing his mind, as new evidence comes out, you do change your mind. I've changed my mind many times. At first, I thought something, and then I learned something new. And I appreciate somebody that can change their mind. I think I've listened to him very carefully, and I think he's been very careful about the way he phrases things.
But what about all those emails that came out of his that indicate that he really wasn't acting honestly?
Like what? Give me an example. Not
I-
all those emails. What?
Let me think. That he knew that there was a good chance that it was created in the Wuhan lab, and that the story about the bat was bullshit, but he
Well,
didn't want that to come out.
I
And he-
will stop for 1 second, because you just said he knew that there was a good chance. So he didn't really know anything, because a good chance is not knowing something.
Yeah,
So
but he was-
possibly he suspected. There's a difference. And when
but the way he presented it, though, that it was absolutely certain that it didn't come out of there. He didn't say anything that there was a good chance or even a possibility. He presented the opposite view. There's tons of really clear information that Fauci is probably going to be the fall guy here, and I would predict that he's going to get killed soon. That's it. I could be way wrong, of course, but uh, they wouldn't want him to be exposing anything else. I'm really someone who believes there's a manipulation going on. There's just so many things. I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. I don't go down those rabbit holes. I've never liked Trump, but I hate Biden equally. And I think that most of our beliefs are manufactured by the CIA's propaganda machine. And so you can't really even trust your own beliefs. But that's why I would never hold or be attached to one of my beliefs, because I'm always open to it being incorrect. I hope everybody else is that way as well, because when people do become attached to beliefs, we get into this polarity discussion or argument. And there's no point in arguing about this. We can have different opinions, perfectly okay. I don't have a problem with it. And we can present our ideas, and you're asking me for some, which is fair. And we may not come to a conclusion. That's okay also.
No, I do think it's important to ask, but Barry has his hand up.
Yeah, Barry's hand is up.
Yeah, there's two versions of the lab leak story that are important to distinguish because they're very different, and I think they get conflated. The gain of function conspiracy theory is that the virus was fabricated in the Wuhan lab by a genetic technique to intentionally construct it. That's the gain of function theory. The other possibility is what's called the lab leak theory. And that's not that it was fabricated there, but some years ago, there were some miners who went into a mine and they contracted a disease while they were in the mine. And it was an unknown disease. And the epidemiologist took samples of one of the miners died, by the way, the other ones recovered. And they did take samples of blood samples of these miners to study them to see if they could figure out what was the disease. And the lab leak theory is that these samples were in the Wuhan lab and had not yet been analyzed, and that possibly other people in the Wuhan lab had contracted the disease from these samples, so that it's an accidental or unintentional lab leak from a disease that was contracted in the wild by miners who went into a mine. That's very different from the notion that there was an intentional attempt to fabricate this virus using technical methods. The gain of function has been totally debunked. Anybody who actually knew how to do that would have won the Nobel Prize in pharmacology years ago. That is so far beyond the state of the art that to suggest that it's possible that this was done, anybody who knew how to do that would have been a world-class hero, because they could then design vaccines, and this would have been a long time ago. So yes, it's possible that the disease got out in the public because somebody in the lab had contracted it from a sample of real people who had contracted it in the wild before. The other one is that it got into the population directly from the animals. But either way you look at it, some animal transferred it to some human somehow. Whether that human had a sample in the Wuhan lab later, that's unknown.
So
But no gain of function.
As Stacy pointed out, Tom appears to have dropped off. So
I didn't notice he dropped
you'll
off.
have to hear your statement after this video becomes available, or
That'll be this afternoon, right? You're pretty fast.
whenever I can get it up. Usually I get it done these days in about less than 12 hours because I got these faster machines now.
I am glad you made the statement, though.
And what?
I'm glad he explained that.
Yes.
It's important.
Yeah. And I actually have never looked into Fauci myself. So, I'm not of any mind one way or another, but it's curious. Anyway, welcome to Colin, welcome to Alex, welcome to Josh. Okay. We're still doing check-ins, but we kind of got a little bit distracted by this Fauci integrity question.
And you see Alex's hand up, right?
I do see Alex's hand up.
Okay.
Okay. Alex, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'll check in. It's a nice day over here. I had an operation to get a cancer cut out of my chest, which was successful. And I'm nursing a wound here right on just above the nipple. And anyway, I've been approving reports. I've been approving posts by members of the Chris Hedges supporters group, which a lot of them are political and about the virus and the Wuhan lab. So that was interesting. Facebook blocked a lot of them because they're fact checked, and you know, some of them are from reputable sources, laboratories in Europe where they study virology, and doctors who have studied viruses all their lives, and they look at this virus and they say that's not a natural virus. They're saying that that's no way that's a natural virus. That's had to be designed by man. It's got too many variations in it that don't happen, and don't occur naturally. And there's some things in that virus that don't occur naturally. You wouldn't find in a natural virus. So that's interesting. I wanted to know more about that because it seems like a trail there. There's a smoking gun. Over.
Coronaviruses have been around for a long time.
The spike proteins, they
That's
found
different.
this.
The spike protein is the one that they think originated maybe in pangolins or maybe some other species and jumped to humans in the wild. That's the most likely hypothesis.
Okay, Stacy, let's see if we can complete this round of check-ins before we start diving into a topic.
Okay, well, I'll use my check-in to complete the topic because I want to say that I think it's really important that we recognize that there are certain topics that the average person really, we're not, you know, myself included, we're not going to get all the nuances, and we're discussing it. I mean, that's sort of like saying, look at the doctor who said that people were becoming magnetized. Just because you're a doctor doesn't mean that you understand everything that has to do with vaccines and virology. Is that the right? Am I saying it right?
And electromagnetic field theory. You don't study electromagnetic field theory in medicine.
So as smart as I might think I am, if I have all the evidence, maybe if I spent a lot of time and really got to the heart of everything, I could have some sort of an opinion, but certainly not enough to give to somebody else. And when stuff like that's going on Facebook, and you have average people just absolutely sure of everything, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And with that, I am complete. And hello, Josh, and do you have news for us?
Yeah, I got good news. Happy to talk about viruses. Love the conversation. My good news is I got a nice, beautiful baby girl. So I'm just really stoked and over the moon. She was born on Monday, 7 pounds. And it's been a beautiful week. So I'm just pretty much up every hour and a half. And was about to watch a basketball game just to try to get my mind straight. My sister's here helping Cusella. And then I said, you know what? It's 8 o'clock on a Saturday. So I was happy to come here. So I was like, yeah. So it's good to see you guys. And thank you. And I'm happy to be with adults because this whole week has just been baby week. But the other good thing is I was watching this amazing interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and they were talking about the UFOs and the UAPs and all that. And one thing he said I thought was brilliant is he said, okay, we believe that they saw this and it was detected. But the question is, what was the detector and who is the expert on the detector that detected it? Because it was an infrared picture. So I think the same thing with the coronavirus applies, is the detector of the virologist that's doing the research on the spike proteins. You know, that's for the experts. I'm not an expert at that stuff. I don't know. And I have listened to Brett Weinstein is an expert on virology, mostly biology. He's debated, I think, Richard Dawkins in biology. He's a biologist, but he's not an expert. As far as I know, I don't think he's a virologist. And he's trying his best to understand it. He's done, I think, 27 podcasts over 4 hours long with virologist experts. And so we're all figuring it out. In other words, the detector is the key. And if you don't know what the detector is, and you're not an expert on if the detector is detecting correctly, we don't know. So, but whatever it is, there's definitely been misinformation out there, and trying to deal with that is hard. So that's my check-in. Thank you, guys. I see your hand up, Sam, and I'm complete. Thank you.
So thanks, Josh. Alex, then me.
And then me, I want to say one thing.
I was reading an article about iron in the blood, which because iron's attracted to magnets. And so I thought, well, if there's a lot of iron in your blood, the magnet will stick to your body. If it's a good magnet or special magnet, I don't know. But that's just a thought, you know. I was connected with that doctor's theory about people becoming magnetized. We've all got iron in our blood. It makes our blood red. And iron's attracted to magnets. If you've got if you're not anemic, you've got too much iron in your blood, you'll be more attracted to magnets. They'll stick to you. When you put a magnet on your body, it'll stick to you. Oh, well.
Right, so that means a magnet would stick to you, not a piece of metal. Yeah, I just, oh, Sam, you were next, and and then Mafufu's back.
Yep. Well, I think you'd have to really, really understand the scale of those forces that we're talking about, because there's one atom of iron in each hemoglobin molecule.
Correct.
Those are spread all over our body, and they're not necessarily polarized the same way. So it's really curious how you get a magnetic field out of that. Anyway, that's not what I was about to say. I wanted to piggyback on something Stacy said, which I think is very key and actually is foundational to barn raising, which is, how do we understand the epistemology or the provenance or the truthiness, the evidence trail of certain claims, certain statements, and what substantiates them and what gives them, plausibility and believability, and even testability. Those are quite important. So I think the flip side of that is not just what people say and what's plausible about what they say, but I think what's important is what people do not say. So in other words, if you have a whole community of so-called experts, right? Let's say the entire population of epidemiologists, okay, who do not contradict someone who makes supposedly controversial claims. That's in a sense passive agreement that there's nothing truly objectionable about what this person is saying. So don't just look at what's being said. Look at what is not being said by those people who should be saying something if the statement were false. This goes for epidemiologists, virologists, biologists, collaborologists as well, okay? People in government, people in economic theory, people in science, et cetera, right? So if somebody makes an outstanding claim in physics, you got tons of people in the whole physics world who would either denounce it or support it. There's all this activity around physicists when a claim gets made. But in medicine, if you're going to take somebody and you claim that that person said something really, really offensive or objectionable or false, and this entire population is sitting there saying, I don't see a problem with that. I mean, I'm not saying that's proof, but that's actually useful information to be folded into the mix. That's all I wanted to say, okay? And Tom is back. So anybody else want to complete a round of check-ins here? Actually, while I've got the floor, I'll check in, okay? So today is the 19th?
Yes.
I've got 11 days to figure out whether on the 12th day I'm going to get kicked out of here or I will actually be a possible title holder of this home. So I'm still trying to figure out how I complete this transaction here. So if I miss a few GCC sessions in the next few weeks, it's probably because I'm homeless, okay? I'll have to figure that out. Anyway, that's a rather dramatic way of saying I'm still trying to figure out how to buy this place. And I've got a couple, possible paths towards that, but anything's all up in the air until the 30th. The second thing is my daughter graduated high school last Friday, which I think I mentioned, but what happened there was my ex-wife also came into town to attend graduation and stuck around until Wednesday. And now my daughter's gone because my ex-wife has absconded with her and taken her to California. That's all legal. I agreed to it. But she's going to be there for another week or so before she gets back. Although I did, in my own self-interest, inform Ronnie that California is in the middle of a heat wave right now, possibly a record-setting heat wave. So Ronnie hates the heat, so she may come back any sooner than staying the entire week. Anyway, so those are a couple of check-ins. So I've got 4 dogs, a cat, and an empty house all to myself. So kind of interesting to spend 24 hours a day with these dogs. Never actually had to do that much before. Anyway, that's my check-in. Anyone else? I think Tom is back. Let's see. So the people who have not checked in are, I think Colin, maybe the only one. Barry, did you consider that a check-in?
Well, I actually had one more thing to say, and this is really for Alex's benefit. My father was in public health as his career occupation, and he taught public health occupations in the community college, including the course in epidemiology. Now, I actually didn't attend my father's course in epidemiology, but I occasionally helped him grade papers, so I have sort of a secondhand exposure to epidemiology, and also studied electrical engineering, so I know something about electromagnetic field theory. Sam is right that there's exactly 1 iron atom in a molecule of hemoglobin. Now, people often, have a cut and you bleed. So next time you have a cut and you bleed, take a drop of blood and a refrigerator magnet and do science. Joshua will tell you that of all the people he knows, I'm about as close to a genuine scientist as he'll find. Let's do an experiment, an actual scientific experiment. Take your refrigerator magnet down to a drop of blood from your own body and see if it sticks to the magnet, as opposed to, say, water or milk. You're going to find out, as Sam has suggested, as he has predicted, that it won't be any different than any other blob of liquid, because liquid blood is not magnetic. And you can test that. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. Do the friggin' experiment.
Do with a power magnet even, not even just a refrigerator magnet.
Yeah, that's what I mean,
Well,
a refrigerator magnet, right.
That's why they brought it up, because these people were saying the magnets were sticking to their arm is where they had the shot.
Show me the TikTok video. Show me the picture.
No, she tried to show
Show
it.
me
It
the
didn't work.
evidence. I don't want to hear the narrative. I want to see the evidence for myself.
Right. Exactly.
Has to be repeatable. In science, you can't just say, oh, I did this experiment, I got this outcome. It has to be repeatable.
That's
You
right.
have to describe the experiment, and other people have to be able to repeat the experiment.
Yeah, they could have been putting glue on the magnets.
Anyway,
Baseball pitchers literally put glue on their fingers to get more spin on the ball.
Tom is back and Josh has his hand up.
Did you want to check in, Tom?
Tom actually started this whole train of thought on epidemiology and Fauci. Tom, do you want to conclude or bring that up or
call and check in maybe?
Sashay over to your topic?
Yeah, sure. I'll check in, Josh.
Thanks,
And
Tom.
congratulate you.
Thanks,
All
brother.
the best. All the best. That's exciting, amazing. Congratulations. And that's all I have to say for now. Thanks.
I'll follow up on that as an interruption then. I have actually members of both males and females as part of my progeny, and I cannot believe how different they are. That's just my own, having grown up with other people, okay, but mostly adults interaction. It's still growing up with them as, this size all the way up to the other size. They're so different. I can't even stop talking about the differences. So I hope you get a chance to actually see both sides. But congratulations on your daughter.
Thanks so much, Sam. Yeah, I helped raise my little brother, and the difference is when I was 13, he was born. So I've been peed in the face by a little penis, but this is the first time it was. I helped raise my nieces too, so 2 little girls. But yeah, I prefer a girl. I'm pretty happy, so it's good. Thank you.
You better say that now.
And I just have one more thing to say.
Yeah, Stace.
So again, in the spirit of collaboration, because we've dealt with this issue when it comes to people and conversations, but I think even in terms of looking at situations, it would be so helpful if we looked at a situation without assigning motivation or intent to any of the players. And I think that just helps us all to evaluate what we're seeing better when we don't necessarily have any background to the players. And I'm complete. Hi, Kayla.
Hey, Kayla. You know, since you bring that up, I use as kind of like the first announcement picture in the Community of Impact Facebook group. This picture that has 2 panels. The first panel is a man and a woman looking at each other, pointing fingers at each other, and there's a kind of a like this cloud that kind of looks like the problem or the mess that they're both pointing to, and they're pointing to each other. The second panel is them standing side by side, both pointing towards this cloud that's in front of both of them, okay? And I find that a very useful cartoon to sort of just illustrate a point, which I believe you just made, if I understand you correctly.
Yes,
I think that's an excellent perspective.
thank you.
Kayla, I think most people have finished a round of check-ins. Would you like to do so?
Just wanted to say hello. Good to see everybody. Who's Mofufu?
That's Tom Osher from Ecuador.
Oh, hello, Tom.
He's gonna spend 10, 15 minutes at least today talking about some of his ideas, but I think he might still be struggling with video and or audio problems.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to listen to whatever Tom has to say and whatever you guys have to say too. I'm gonna have to work a little bit while I listen, so I'll contribute as much as I can.
Damn it, you're not gonna be 100% present? God damn it.
I know, I'm just happy to put my video on. But yeah, just kind of winding down from being extremely busy these past couple of months, and things actually seem to be moving along with me. Next weekend, I'm going to be hiking Half Dome with my friend over in Yosemite, so we're getting that ready. I just got off the phone with a woman in Cincinnati, so there's a good chance I'll be going to Cincinnati sometime next month as well, to do a presentation over there. I've got 2 workshops lined up,
Nice.
and yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting how things kind of just started back up after the governor here in California said that you don't have to wear masks and the numbers are going down. So I'm like, fuck it, I'm out of here. So, thankfully I still work remotely, and that's taking off too. And, my kids and I are doing well, and there's really nothing to complain about, even though eventually I will complain about something. So good to see everybody.
Good to see you guys. I'm just gonna say goodbye. I gotta go check on the baby. Good to see you.
Picture,
Congratulations, Dad.
video.
Dad jokes are coming.
Thank you. I'll be back and then solve the corona problem.
Hey, Josh, nothing
Cheers.
better than skin
Yeah.
on skin, baby sleeping on your shoulder, one of the best feelings in the world.
And qigong with your baby is the bomb. So yeah, baby qigong. See you guys later. Cheers.
And happy Juneteenth that Barry put in the text.
Right.
You
There
know?
it is. How come we didn't get used to it?
Hello? Oh, you
We
can
can
hear?
hear you now, Tom.
Yeah,
Oh.
Tom, your audio is working now.
It's incredible. I really believe in.
There's an echo, by the way, Tom, because you
Because
got
he's
2
on
mics.
twice.
Right. You got to turn off the microphone on at least one of your devices. Okay. Yeah. See, the both microphones are on right now.
Both? I only have
Can we
one.
kick him off the other one? Can we?
I
is there a
could, but
way-
I don't want to be so rude.
Well, you're only kicking him off of one.
I think he's got one of them muted now.
Yeah, but the one that's muted,
The muted is his ability to speak to us. That doesn't mute his microphone, does it? On his
Mutes
side.
one of them, mutes one microphone. The
Right.
thing is the other one has to be close to where he's sitting.
Right. So if you could just select one device, Tom, you'll be good.
Yeah, try one or the other.
50% chance you'll get it right though.
Dear.
or
Yeah.
turn off his speakers for the one that he has muted.
No, see, his
Right.
microphone is working on his side, okay? Both microphones are working on his side, okay? So I'm only stopping what's happening on one of those sessions, but he himself can hear on both.
Right, but if he stops
Hello?
the audio that he's getting on the one that's muted on our side, we won't hear the feedback, correct?
There's four
If you follow that
combinations.
grammatically.
I've been there.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I hear me.
There's a
Oh,
big echo. There's a lot.
Okay.
Okay. Hey,
Feedback.
Tom, I'll give you 5 more seconds and then I'll just kick off one of these sessions, okay?
What are you gonna do?
Can I kick off the session that I believe you don't need?
You can do whatever you like.
Okay, let me remove that session.
Yes,
Okay,
that was the
now,
correct
are
one,
you still
remove it.
there? Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay,
Or
you're
no.
good now. See, the echo's gone. Okay.
Oh, I'm
All right.
being, this is a CIA plot. No, just kidding. Oh, well, I don't know what to
It
do.
could
I'm
be.
not
I used to work for them.
Yeah, not- we
Oh,
used to
Interesting
have you know-
disclosure.
serious.
Did you really?
You don't know that? I didn't say that before. I've actually been transparent about this for quite a while. I used to visit McLean, Virginia every 6 weeks for probably, let's see, 93, 87, at least 6 years,
Okay.
and other locations as well. So yeah, I used to work in the defense business before I joined the quote unquote commercial world. So you know, all the stuff that Snowden saw, I saw similar.
I have some stories to exchange with you about working for the CIA, openly or not so openly.
Yeah, I was supposed to wait 10 years before saying anything about that. So it's over 2 decades now.
I'll tell you a funny story when we have time.
Okay. Anyway, so if anybody needs somebody from the CIA to exert some pressure, go talk to somebody else.
Go talk to Jack Ryan.
Actually, I have on offer, and some of you may know this, that I'm actually, sorry, no, that's a digression. I won't talk about that. Okay, are we ready to, is Tom still here? Tom, would you like to recap the ideas that you were presenting last week and then drive them towards kind of like, you know, where you were headed? Where are you concluding, and then, you know, make that available for possible discussion? Would you like to take that topic on now?
Can you hear me at all?
We
Can
can
you
hear
hear
you. We can
Yeah.
hear you.
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. Okay,
We
then let me,
cannot see you, but we can hear you.
that's okay, I think. Well, I think that how we're governed is a major problem all over the world. I think, and it's something that somehow people don't seem to be confronting, even though there's a lot of protests and screaming about how they don't like it, but it's not being confronted, in my opinion. And this is one of the, I think we need to confront the corrupt governments, the economy that's unfair and unjust and terrible, and the propagandizing by your former employer. You know who I'm talking about. I guess we can say those words, CIA. Anyway, you probably were compartmentalized, I imagine, and may not have been involved with the propaganda machine. So I don't expect that you have any particular stories or expertise about that, or do you?
As an aside, okay, I was not part of what's called the DDO, which you're referring to. It's called
Yeah.
the Directorate of Operations, okay? And those are the spooks that go out and actually handle people. So I
Right.
was not part of that.
So anyway, I think that we have been constantly inundated with propaganda since they were born. And I do believe that they use that to create the beliefs that we have in our heads so that we will do what they hope.
Did we just lose him?
I think Tom just dropped.
Okay, so I'll use this, I'll use this time. So my issue is, how do we ever know the source of any propaganda until we actually have an investigation, until it's all brought to light? And I'm not questioning that there's propaganda, and I'm not even questioning that it comes from this, that, and the other place, that many people use it. But I am really going to have a hard time. I don't have a hard time if somebody tells me some organization or some source is putting out this propaganda. Then I'd like to look at the propaganda and figure out where did it originate. But to make this assumption that it came from any one place is just crazy. And it's how we hurt each other, because both sides are convinced there's propaganda. But instead, both sides fight over where it came from. And we never, like you said, that picture, we never point to the cloud and say, let's just stop it and put it to an end. And I'm sorry if I'm getting worked up, but this is a big one for me.
Yep, I like your passion on this topic, because it is truly, well, wait, Colin has his hand up, so let me stop first and let Colin speak first.
Yeah, I'll just make a plug for my favorite example of trying to get to understand why people believe things. The mother of all examples is in faith-based beliefs, whether it be religion or some other thing. That, you know, conspiracy theorists are another example. So yeah, I think one of the things depends on how long ago did the thing happen, and how you're going to contextualize it and define who are the authorities. And it would save a lot of time if people could just say and code the evidence so that there is a bit of a standard when it comes to the possibility range. It's not just people associating in their mind how possible they think it is, as opposed to, you know, a little bit more statistical symbology. Like there's a huge difference, for example, between what a country preacher will tell you where the Bible came from and where scholars will tell you where the Bible came from. And like right there, I think there's the distinction of what does, you know, what kind of truth you're talking about. So is it falsifiable? Is it in the woo range, the woo range, or the possible scientific range? So, you know, and woo kind of crosses the lines between both. Anyway, go ahead, Sam.
Okay, so let me summarize what I think I heard you say, okay? One is, in order to evaluate a claim, not only do you have to take the claim at face value and see whether it's got supporting evidence or, you know, is consistent logically with, you know, what else you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's category one. Category two, which tries to give you a clue, but is not conclusive, is what are those communities of people who either support or negate or detract from the claim, and look at their basis for that, and look at whether or not, you know, those claims have, you know, equal truthiness. And then the third, I was about to say the third, but I think I forgot what the third is. I'll see if I can remember it later. But yes.
It has to be more on context, the history, like if it's like a long time ago, or
Well,
if it's something that happened.
Right. So
Yeah.
I think, you know, time can be factored into all of this. You can follow the evidence trail, the knowledge trail, if you call it that, back, you know, as well as can be quote unquote verified. which is difficult, I agree, when things are very, very, very long time ago. So you have to do a number of different triangulations on it. Oh, the third point I was trying to make is that's why no matter how much of the others you do, transparency is paramount, because there's always possible that something crucial is hidden from the whole picture. And in fact, that's why many false flag operations are successful. When you actually do not understand the source of funding or the source of direction on a lot of the quote unquote terrorism that's happening, you don't understand how much of it could potentially be false flag operations. And those are insidious. Those are truly, truly criminal. And yet we've seen so much evidence of that already. That's why I think we're not ever going to get to fair governance or social systems without sufficient, and in this case, sufficient may mean absolute transparency. Over. Stacy.
To put an example to that, if I were in a room of people of different political beliefs and I said, there was this major protest and the other side sent in people to incite violence, everybody in the room would be open to that possibility. The only difference would be who each person thinks was the group and who each person thinks was the other side that sent in the people. So that was one point I want to make. But the other point I want to make to your last one is, again, it starts with each individual human being. How often are we willing to say or do something to not lose our job? How often are we willing to give a perk to a friend of ours that they're not supposed to have, but because they're our friend, we will do it? How often would you I don't mean you or me, but how often would any individual cover for somebody they love? So until we as individuals start acting with integrity, or only put people of a certain level of integrity in powers of authority, I don't see how any system of government is going to make any difference. I don't care if you're talking about a school board. If you're on a school board or a PTA board and you have people that do not have that level of integrity, things are going to go corrupt. I'm complete.
Well, I actually I agree with you almost 100%, but I have a different view, a different conclusion than you come to, okay? Which is, I don't think we can start any system of government by finding only those people who are of high integrity. That's just a non-starter, it comes to me, okay?
Why?
Any system of government must deal with regular humans who are going to be mostly integrity or integrous, or what do you call it, high integrity, but
Okay,
are going to be imperfect, okay? So the system of government, in my view, that needs to happen has to accommodate for those violations of integrity, which means checks and balances of some,
Yes.
okay? In other words, you can't just say, I'm going to be a philosopher king and I will only, pass on the government to another philosopher king when I die. That's just non-practical, impractical.
I wasn't saying that. I agree with what you're saying now. That's
Yeah.
part of it too.
Right. So that's why I think, you can't just take people of high integrity into government. We have to take almost anyone with their potential flaws and construct a way of living together, i.e. civilization or society or governance, that can accommodate for violations of trust or integrity or authority, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I think the fact that we have a journalism class, what they used to call the fourth estate? Is that what they used to call?
Yes.
That is paramount importance to a fair society. If you don't have that, like we don't have in the United States today, we are far from that today, which is why all this other crap can happen. We don't have a fair journalism profession free to act on its own ethics. It's all controlled by other powers. They're owned by corporate megalopolies or whatever they're called. Okay. And that's why we can't get to quote unquote the truth. Tom says he's hearing the truth from one set of sources. Others are hearing it from a different set of sources. We don't have a trusted media, fourth estate today in the United States. And that's why I think, getting back there is the move towards transparency. And if we can't get it from journalism, we have to get it from us. We, the people, have to, make that happen. Over.
Can I just real quick? Yes, and that's my point. Also, we have to, as individuals, help create that culture where that's what we expect. So I agree with everything you said. I'm saying it's all of that.
Agreed. And I think what we're trying to figure out here is how do we exemplify that
Right.
as individuals, the individuals you are describing, and I am trying to be a member of as well. Okay. That I think is the purpose of GCC. How do we coexist in an unfair world where none of us are perfect, and yet we can still construct a society that is fair and all those other good words that we want?
Barry's had his hand up.
Barry.
Yeah, governance corresponds to what in engineering we call a regulatory mechanism. Feedback control systems are generally the study of how you regulate a complex system so that it stays on course, doesn't drift or go haywire. And one of the oldest observations and units of wisdom about regulatory systems that work as intended is that you have to correctly know the true state of the system. And that idea is so old that it's already there in the 10 Commandments. You have to bear accurate witness. If anybody bears false witness and that information goes into the feedback loop, the feedback system drives the vehicle off the road. Now that is the part of the fundamental theorem of feedback control theory, which is 20th century mathematics. But the notion that you have to bear accurate witness has been in the culture since whoever wrote the 10 Commandments 3,500 years ago. That's an important insight. And, you're talking about the CIA, well, how about the FBI? J. Edgar Hoover was the head of the FBI for the first, 30 or 40 years of its existence. And he wrote a book about communism called Masters of Deceit. And his observation was propaganda is all about generating deceitful information that people will swallow. And of course, the American government, partly under J. Edgar Hoover and Nixon and others, became masters of deceit themselves. So this whole thing of propagating false information and then thereby screwing up the regulatory mechanism, this is not only a serious issue today, it's been a serious issue in humankind for millennia. And the next question is, well, how do you make sure that you're bearing accurate witness? And the answer is the protocols of the scientific method are one of the best known methods for ensuring that we're not fooling ourselves, not just fooling others, because it's also easy to fool yourself. And Feynman made that part of his commencement address at Caltech. You're the easiest person to fool. Don't fool yourself. And how do you avoid that? Rigorously adhere to the protocols of the scientific method. Tom was on the Messenger, Sam, and he said he was trying to get back in. He wanted you to look at his message to you on Facebook Messenger.
Okay. I have something between me and the keyboard right now. Hang on a second.
I got a follow up to that, not to provoke, but to add a point of interest to what Stacy was saying. And knowing Barry's commitment towards the scientific way of approaching, and witnessing, that goes back to my idea of just not lying. So if and Stacy saying, well, is not being you could witness something but not tell anybody, therefore you're not really a witness. Or you could know something and not tell somebody, So the omission can also be a part of that. But on a totally different side of the coin, Barry's interest in some of the religious / science groups. Since he is so scientific, I find it interesting that how he does line up his facts with a lot of the theology stuff. So that's a very interesting thing that we have in the group that we can look into. Something that was missing from the conversation before, I think.
So can I interject here and as a experiment say, in the acknowledgement of the importance of focus, that to me sounds like an unrelated topic. I mean, it's related, sorry, but it's not the direct topic that we're talking about, because that begins to talk about Barry as a person and what he believes and his mental model or his theory of mind, which I believe
No,
is
I agree. I
not
agree.
the topic that we're talking about. So did you truly intend to shift the conversation to that topic? Because I think if so, please announce that intent. Otherwise it comes up as a distraction and takes us away from the transparency in government and epistemology and what we were talking about.
Well, I think it's just one more. It's one more node towards discussing the truth aspect and how do we know. And
yeah, but you're making
where do
it
we get the
personal.
evidence?
You're making it personal now, Colin.
Well, not so much personal as experience in the group, because that's something that's one of the things I find most interesting about Barry is his interest in science, religion, and we tried to approach that before. But you're right.
So you are making it personal now, Colin.
Well, I guess I'm labeling somebody in the
I'm
group
hearing that you really intend to shift the focus because you've interrupted me three times now when I say that we are trying to stay focused, and you are interrupting 3 times when I've tried to bring us back into focus. Now,
well, the focus I'm looking at is the truth conversation that Stacy brought up, and the
you could address
conversation
that without mentioning Barry and his theory of mind. You could, right?
But yeah,
Well, Barry did bring up an example of the Bible was the oldest example of where you have witnessing. And I'm saying that witnessing, if it's not put forward, it depends on, more about truth and how you can find out if somebody's actually bullying or lying while they're witnessing as well, which I think is a more poignant point because
you could have made that point without talking about Barry personally, right?
Well, I'm not trying to change the conversation, but saying that there's an advanced conversation we can have around truth and science.
Right, so you are bringing up a possible conversation, which is a distraction. See, I'm trying to keep us focused in this new mode of trying to appreciate focus. And you're trying to, what I'm observing and interpreting, is defending a distraction which you introduced and are now defending 5 or 6 times.
No, I'd rather get
You're
on to
doing it
the
again.
main focus of the truth trail.
Okay, so I propose 2 minutes where neither you nor I speak, and everybody else tries to figure out what just happened.
Okay,
You do
go
that?
ahead.
All right, Stace.
Alex, is it okay if I go first? Okay, I'm gonna, just to not be distracted, I'm gonna address it a different way. Colin, I don't think you recognize that when Barry brings up a story that is from the Bible, he's saying, even in the Bible, the story is made to reflect the same principle that comes from science. So it's not like there's 2 contradicting things. He's saying science says that, and even the stories in the Bible seem to be indicating that that was what was trying to be taught. And with that, I'm complete. Alex.
Yes, you're right. The scientists used to think the Earth was flat, but that was wrong. So most of the things we think we've got right are actually incorrect, because in 200 years from now, we'll understand that. It's like, when we look back 200 years ago, a lot of the theories were wrong because they thought what they knew, they had at their disposal the knowledge that was accrued over the centuries. But in this modern world of politics and democracy, we have countries getting the government they deserve. It's like the most Western countries have fairly good systems of healthcare for the disadvantaged and the underprivileged, but not in the USA. What happened in the USA? Well, their constitution was constructed by capitalists for the benefit of capitalists. And if they allowed people to opt out of the voting system, which they did, they put that in the constitution, then most of the people who are poorly educated don't bother voting. They don't realise the value of the power of their vote because of their level of education. So they're the people who are not counted when the legislators are framing policy. They're just ignored because they don't vote. And the policy framers know that. They're a safe bet, they can ignore them. But not in most Western countries like Australia, New Zealand, most of Europe. They have compulsory voting. So that means the people that are underprivileged are listened to as well. And therefore you've got better hospital cover for them, better education. Oh, but
Okay, Barry and or Kayla.
Kayla, do you want to say something? If not,
Kayla
No.
got a phone call.
okay. Yeah, I saw that. So a very modern word in science is the word theory. And, you know, theory is something that's thought to be correct, thought to be accurate, but and makes good predictions and maybe has good explanations, maybe has good diagnostic power, but it's not considered truth. It's considered our best knowledge to date. And the word theory is a very interesting word because it comes from a Greek root, theoria. Theoria in Greek means I behold. I behold. So here you are as scientists, you look at the world around you and you behold what your senses report to you. And to the best of your knowledge and ability, you report what you beheld. And then you, in science, you invite others to come and take a look and see, do they behold the same thing you saw, that you observed? So one of the things is that how do we get an accurate picture of what's out there is invite other people to come and confirm that they see, hear, feel, sense the same thing you saw, heard, felt, or sensed. And so then you have some evidence of an observation that's not just self-delusion, that it wasn't an hallucination or something. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, so a meta comment. I was inviting some conversation on whether I acted incorrectly on pointing out a distraction by Colin. I didn't hear you guys specifically follow, maybe Stacy did, okay? So I'm just gonna assume that you guys don't want to speak to that point directly. So I will then also assume, and I'm stating it explicitly, that we're back on this topic of governance and truth and science and whatever. So I'm gonna follow up on that one right now, which is democracy. And I think it was Alex that talked about governments and, you know, we get what we deserve. And whether or not educated people or uneducated people vote. Democracy has actually succeeded because we do get the majority rule of those people who choose to vote. And unfortunately, due to the level of education and its continuing demise and deterioration over decades, the people who vote are less and less educated. If we believe in the progress of science, the progress of, you know, really developing new bodies of knowledge and really relying on them to guide us, we have fewer and fewer people who are competent in those bodies of knowledge, and they are yet still granted the privilege of voting. So we're getting dumber and dumber people voting. I am observing that and stating it very bluntly, because that's what's happening in this country and possibly others. But I'm only speaking about this country for now. So if we did require 100% of the vote, we would get even more dumb people voting, is the problem. Democracy is a guaranteed system where the best idea never gets implemented because the majority probably don't have the preparation, the time, the degree of detail, the attention to detail, and even the preference for truth that is required to really understand truly the best ideas. So that's why I have never been a fan of democracy. I think it's much better than other systems, but it's still not a good system. It's not even close to the best. Over. Barry.
Yeah, what's interesting about democracy is exactly what it is that's on the ballot. Usually what's on the ballot is a representative who's going to participate in the legislature or become the governor or the president. Sometimes on the ballot is a piece of legislation. Something's going to become law. But what's almost never on the ballot is a goal. For example, when Kennedy said, we're going to adopt the goal of landing a man on the moon by the end of the decade and bring him back alive, that's a goal. I would love to live in a culture where we voted on community goals, and then we hired really smart people who are specialists who said, oh, you want to land a man on the moon? Let's get a bunch of rocket scientists and engineers working for NASA who can figure out how to do that, and not tell them exactly how they have to do it. Let them figure it out. So democracy would work a whole lot better if we were voting for goals and objectives rather than methods to reach a goal. And one of the big mistakes that humans made, I'm going to say 5,000-6,000 years ago, is they adopted a belief that rule-based methods of regulation are the way to go. And it wasn't until the second half of the 20th century that I stumbled on a piece of mathematics that a lot of people had figured out thousands of years ago. That rule-based systems are not inherently orderly. If you're a child, they define games, like board games like checkers, or chess, or Go, or Othello. And one of the important breakthroughs in 20th century mathematics is that rule-based systems have chaotic dynamics. They are not orderly, stable, and predictable. They are mathematically chaotic. So if your goal is to have an orderly, well-regulated, stable system, you don't want to build it out of rules. You want to build it out of something that will actually do the job. Did you want to say
Not all
something?
rule-based systems. Some of them, Barry, not all of them.
Yeah, the more rules, clearly the ones that children are familiar with, games, are mathematically chaotic. There's an astronomical number of legal games of checkers. Now, there's only a small number of legal games of tic-tac-toe. That's small enough that you can figure out the optimal strategy. But any game that's for real, not for real young children, there's an astronomical number of possible outcomes, and they're really not predictable. They're full of drama. And if you don't want a system that's full of drama, then you have to have an architecture that's well-regulated and stable. And that means you don't build it out of rules. You build it out of protocols and functions and models, so you have a system that behaves the way you want. And if you want a high-functioning, well-regulated system, the key word is function. You have to build it out of functions, mathematical functions that solve the system model. That's graduate level stuff in 20th century cybernetics. Even though people thousands of years ago kind of understood it in a kind of a metaphorical way, they couldn't do the math because the math didn't become available until the 20th century. Go ahead, Sam.
So I'll dissent slightly, because to me, protocols are rules. So I don't understand why the different formulation. Protocols are guidelines, protocols, models, guidelines, they're all rules. Okay, just put it a different way.
But they're not built out of if, then, or else statements. They're built out of mathematical functions.
I also dissent there.
But isn't there a difference between guidelines and rules? Because to me, I see a very big difference.
There's a huge difference.
Yeah,
Very, very
guidelines are necessary, not
Yeah.
rules.
Yes. If you're a pilot of an airplane on a taxiway, you do not have lane lines like we have on the highway. You have a guideline down the middle, and you try to zero out the error between your front wheel on the airplane and the guideline. In a car, you don't have a guideline in the middle of your lane. You have boundaries on the edge and you try to stay away from the boundary. Mathematically, it's much harder to stay centered in a lane where you've got boundaries than to stay centered in a lane where you got a guideline down the middle.
But they're
Huge difference in
equivalent.
the amount of math.
It's a different math, but it's equivalent.
It would be equivalent if the calculations were as efficient to do and as functional and as with the outcome. But in reality, it's much harder and it's much easier to make mistakes. It's the amount of math to follow a guideline, center guideline, is much simpler than putting boundaries, guardrails, and staying away from the guardrails. You can do that. I mean, flying animals try to stay away from their neighbors and not bump into them, but it's much more complex math. It's a huge difference in reducing it to practice.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Is it true to say that the consequences of breaking or going outside of a guideline would be less than the consequences of going outside of a rule?
If you go outside of a guideline, what rule systems do is referee blows the whistle, points his finger at you, says you've committed an infraction, and there's this whole judgmental process of saying, was that an infraction and do we penalize this person?
So my point is that the reaction is more severe.
Yeah.
And I
and
think that's the problem.
Not just more severe, more chaotic, more
Yes.
problematic, and more literally dysfunctional.
Yeah.
That was the mistake humans made. The invention of the rule of law, where you go over a boundary, which is the boundary between lawful and unlawful, and then you blow the whistle and you have a judging process and a penalty. That turns out to be a mathematical error in the architecture of our regulatory mechanisms that humans developed about 5,000 years ago.
Okay, so Alex has his hand up, but then I want to respond to that.
Yeah, without the policing, a community following guidelines will flow smoother. Those that flow outside the guidelines will encounter difficulties and be slowed down. Those who stay inside the guidelines will flow quicker in the same direction with the community, and that'll improve things. That's unblocking. Over.
Okay,
You can't be inside the guideline. The guideline is the middle, the goal, the
Okay.
center of the bullseye. That's the guideline.
But you can go out to the left or the right.
so
But
speaking,
you're always outside the center.
my hand is up.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Speaking as a foreigner and innately unable to get into the fine details of the semantics that you are quite familiar with, Barry, to me, rules and protocols and guidelines can be treated the same way. The fact that a referee blows a whistle is another rule or protocol. The fact that you then have another discussion among judges is another rule or protocol. Those don't have to be there, as Alex just pointed out. There were additional rules imposed in addition to whether or not there's left and right versus middle. Okay, so it could be the case that in a middle-based protocol, you still have a referee that blows a whistle when your front wheel of the airplane strays more than 2 feet from the center line. You could have done the same thing. Same mechanism as what happened with the left and right boundaries. Okay, you didn't have to have it, but you assumed it existed in one without the other. That's why I'm saying they're actually equivalent. And from a foreigner standpoint, only understanding fuzzy notions, okay, they look blobulous. They look like there's a lot of overlap between them. And if you were to take that view and say they're more or less equivalent, I'm not going to then quibble about the semantic differences other than pointing out that these referee blowing whistles and other penalizations are additional rules and or additional guidelines and or additional protocols that you ascribe to one versus the other. And not the other is what I'm saying, okay? So that's why I still gently disagree with you, Barry, in that, that distinction to me is not quite as deep as I think you take it as. So either I'm still misunderstanding, or I just, I'm treating these as more or less equivalent. Over.
Go ahead, Barry.
Did you want
Barry.
to first? Did you want to go first, Stacy?
No, it's okay. I wrote it down, so I'll remember.
The key difference, and it's mathematical, Sam, is that as you depart from the center line, you have a measure, a continuous measure of how far you're departing.
You do
And
that
then
in the other system as well.
You're
And,
interrupting.
Yes, I chose to, yes.
and in a modern feedback control system, you take this numerical value of this departure, this measure of departure, and you continuously continuously put that value into a function that computes an amount of correction. So you're constantly correcting as a function of your instantaneous departure all the time. You do not say, I do nothing, nothing. Oh, now I got to do something. You're always doing something which is nominally proportional to the departure. And the function that's in the feedback loop is the function inverse of the system model you're trying to regulate. That's a huge advance in mathematical reasoning. Okay. Or
Stace, you want to go?
No, no,
I
no.
missed that last part. I missed that last part. Could you restate the last sentence? What was the huge advancement?
Putting in a mathematical function that is the function inverse of the system model of the system you're trying to regulate. And the value that goes into that function inverse is the numerical value of the instantaneous departure from the optimum, the goal.
Okay, so I still submit, and this is probably getting pedantic now, that is not materially different than what someone does by saying, oh, I'm going to stay within the right boundary or I'm going to stay within the left boundary. You're still looking at the distance from the right side of the car to the right boundary or the left side of the car to the left boundary. So even though it may encode itself in software with more instructions, it's still mathematically equivalent. So I submit that either I'm still not misunderstanding or you're trying to make a more fine distinction that I think actually exists.
I guess we need to do examples, but that would be,
by the way, 67 other people, yeah.
yeah, that would be a whole workshop.
Well, the example I was going to use was automated cars who have to sample where they are now. And I think the point isn't really so much about the car sampling a guideline down the center or doing multiple boundary calculations, which is necessary for, real life situations. So it can be done, therefore it's equivalent in that way. But I think it comes down to more of the talk between a protocol rule and I think a protocol is when you want to actually exchange information from one place to another. You want to get the message across and you want it not to be garbled in a way that you can tell if it was, like the internet's a good example. When you send a packet, it can resend it if it was missed. There's a protocol to know that the message made it there. So, there's all kinds of rules built into that protocol. Now on the rule side of things, when somebody blows the whistle that somebody's offside, that's more important if there's some kind of prize to be won, some legality. And if there's $1 million on stake, then they're going to have to get out and, so these rules become more and more important when there's more at stake. So in engineering, it's a different context than it is in legality. And I think the two do cross because, what happens if the car runs into somebody when it's being auto steered by Google, right? So did they use the right algorithm or should they have used a guideline? Barry would be, but anyway. So yeah, it's kind of very context driven and example driven. So a protocol to me is an exchange of information, where a rule is something where you can prove that somebody did it wrong, but there might be no way to correct it. Where a protocol actually, I think, attempts to correct things if it can in an information exchange context or some kind of merging of lanes. I don't know. Is merging of lanes a protocol or is that a rule? Go ahead, Sam.
The reason I want to make this an important point is because if we're doing quote unquote systems thinking, or if we're doing model-based thinking, and if we think that two models or two systems that we're both describing are different, then we're going to waste a lot of time trying to figure out, which is better. What I'm trying to say is if they're equivalent, then we don't have to quibble about those differences. We can actually improve the one system that we both seem to understand, but we're using different terminology and different mathematics to describe. I think that is a danger when we try to think systems E, or we try to think based on models, okay? Is that it can be very easily taken that what Colin says and what I say, or what you say, or what Stacy say, sound different, but are, at least mathematically and from a model standpoint, depending on the granularity and specificity of the model, equivalent. So I would really try to find commonalities between what we're saying, because then we can actually really dig into what are the differences. That's huge. In addition to transparency, in addition to sharing language and terms, this mapping of models is crucial. So I really appreciate this conversation because it was able to explicate that thought for me as we held this conversation. So thanks to all of you who are making this happen. Over.
So I guess it would be, what's that?
Go ahead and speak. I was trying to take a turn since I heard silence.
I guess it would be best that we preface whether we think that there is a reason to pick a more nuanced term. I had a discussion with somebody around that as well, where a lot of time was spent on trying to elicit the word for feedback, which was the word was being looked for was observe or observer. And I used the word sensor and all kinds of these other words, which weren't adequate. And I think that sometimes it is important to make a distinction and sometimes it isn't. So it can waste a lot of time. And I would like to know up front before I spend that time what the distinction is. And then I'm willing to put a lot of time into trying to understand that distinction, because as you learn in engineering in certain fields, what you learn in first year gets corrected in second year, so anyway, a lot of different things, nuances come into play.
Thank you. Stacy?
Yeah, I definitely agree that sometimes it's not important to make a distinction, but sometimes it is. And sometimes it's the people that don't understand why there would be a need to make a distinction that are so vocal about not having to make one or not looking for one. And that's usually my frustration.
I agree with you. Barry, Alex, and then me.
Yeah, just very briefly. I spent a good portion of my 2 decades at Bell Labs working this very issue. They had a lot of dysfunctional practices in the Bell system to manage the telephone network. And every time they had a really problematic dysfunctional system that wasn't regulating things well, AT&T would kick it over to Bell Labs to figure it out. And a lot of those fell in my lap. And in every case that I worked on, they were using a very simple rule-based system that wasn't working as imagined. And in every case, I threw away the rule and replaced it by a real-time function-based regulatory mechanism where I had to construct the model of the system they're trying to regulate, then compute the function inverse of that and say, use that in the feedback loop. And that was a major upgrade in the regulatory mechanism. And that's how I became a distinguished member of technical staff at Bell Labs, because those problems were so hard that they couldn't find people who could figure out how to solve them. And I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I was able to make those analyses and solve the problem, build the models, and replace these dysfunctional rules with high functioning feedback systems that made the original problem go away?
Alex?
I wanted to point out the item on that rules, the item on that guidelines sheet, which number 5 about politics, about political conversation. And it says that the topics we are engaging in are on the political radar, and the topics in politics polarize us and limit our potential by endorsing only control-based top-down solutions. So it looks like if the conversation wants to be a collaborative, constructive conversation, empathizing with the idea that we're looking for solutions and teamwork, then we don't want to post topics that are related to politics or political figures, unless we're members of the party in a political group doing campaigning for politics. We're not. We're collaboratively. We're doing something for the community that's supposed to be generating ideas and sprouts that allow people to collaborate better. Over.
Okay. Barry, I'm not fundamentally disagreeing with what you're saying, but the point I'm trying to make is if we think from a goal perspective, you brought up this whole notion of goals, right? So one way of thinking about goals is what are we trying to optimize? Right. If we agree on what we're trying to optimize, then from some standpoints, 2 different descriptions, 2 different representation models could sound and look different. In fact, the terms used by each of the inventors of each are different terms. But if you actually look at what they do in light of the goal, the thing that you're trying to optimize, okay, they may not be that different. You may be able to map the behavior of one into the behavior of the other. And I guess there might be a word, I might be wrong, but they might be homologs of each other. They might behave similarly, okay? And so this, in one perspective, is the modern Tower of Babel problem. I was taught when I was young that the Tower of Babel problem was we had too many people, 2 different tribes, too many different languages. People couldn't, work together because they couldn't understand each other, right? If we take it from language to model, we would have a similar problem if we don't learn how to map these models from one to another. That, I think, is a crucial element of systems thinking. And I've not heard it much mentioned. Model mapping is really one of the most important things. At a lower level, Dictopedia is just terms and phrase mapping. If you go another level of sophistication, it's entire models / theories of mind / theories of systems. That, I think, is the modern perspective that I would pose as the Tower of Babel problem. Over.
So this is difficult for me because the math and the science that you're taught, some of it's like over my head. So the way I'm absorbing it is more of in an abstract sense and something I have thought about. So, so when you talk about the different tribes or whatever, I look at it as if we took smaller bites, and that, I'm always trying to say that because, so for example, let's say we're talking about the justice system. What's the goal? To reform or to punish? So now you have the people that fall into the punish, you have the people that fall into the reform, and maybe you have the people in, a little bit of each. To me, if you start there and then just take one little baby step forward, some of that might shift again. So visually speaking, I see a braiding of the tribes, but the braiding doesn't happen when you jump so far ahead. And that's why I like the idea that Barry said of coming first coming to a point of what are the community goals? Because we assume that people's goals are the same as ours, and they're not.
May I say something there? Which is why, to me, co-visioning is essentially goal setting in one perspective. Co-visioning for me is one of the 6 pillars of GCC, or at least barn raising. Sense making is just how do we learn to talk to each other? Co-visioning is how do we learn to look the same direction? Collaboration is how do we go from here to there? If I take a look at the largest high-level view of what GCC is trying to do and what these conversations could be, that's a model that I would pose as a simple 3-part model. The other aspects support all of this, the other 3 over. Stace?
And that's why I say it's so important to keep asking the questions, because in asking the questions and hearing the answers, even if we think we already know, we get new bits of information and we see the nuances, and those nuances are really important.
Right. Which the behavior you're saying is, if you think you know the answer, therefore you're not interested in changing it, even based on new information, that's basically the definition of closed-mindedness, right? If you're open-minded, then each conversation has the potentiality of being fresh. So when I hear this critique of, oh, we're just having the same conversation over and over and over. So it's like, either you're hearing the same thing and not hearing the new things that are being said, or you're not even listening. Because you've already got your, defined position on this assumed topic. And if you hear topic, oh, I know what my position is. Therefore, we don't have to have this conversation. That's a default automatic that is dangerously easy to adopt when we're engaged in these conversations where we don't have good group shared memory. One more thing I wanted to say about this. I'll wait. Colin has his hand up. And then Kayla.
Okay, I'll reiterate. Again, when one wants to question into something to understand it better, then at that point you might be diverging from a common term. For example, if you're trying to figure out, what's the difference? Is it a term or is it a model? It's just a, like you say, a level of granularity between, the lessons learned from assuming, I guess, but you already know the answer. So I find if somebody's going to propose something that's different in a group where the conversation has been had, and maybe there's an established memory, which would be nice to map what GCC is and where the memory holes are. And, I won't digress there, but it's a very complicated experiment we're involved in because it's different, like Stacy said, for each person that there's different goals or different assumed experience. And therefore, if you're going to challenge somebody in this space to redefine a term, then it would be nice to say why, again, up front, you would like to challenge that term. And Barry brought it up before, like, how do you bring up that type of, I don't think it's dissension, but he was talking about dissension, but just questioning. It doesn't have to be dissension for clarification. So how do we open up to this? Oh, that's a good question. Or, oh, you're wasting our time splitting hairs. Like, how do we make that distinction? I think is important up front, as opposed to giving lots of examples and then coming to frustrating conclusions that you're saying the same thing over and over again. And so where you say people have open mind to new ideas, yes, but when something's been established and there's a memory to it, I think there's a certain responsibility to the group to try to keep those guideline rules, protocols or models in mind, whether they're agreed upon or individual. We should, we each learn how to coexist and co-vision. So yeah, that's very important, how we can ask each other about our visions without being taken as somebody who's trying to disrupt. Or, like when I was asking earlier today, it was more about there's opportunity in the future. And I apologize, because you're right, Sam. I did divert the conversation unintentionally. And Barry answered my question. Thank you very much, Barry. But I was thinking that, and it was good too, like in a roundabout way. With some of the foresight, we can actually get into nuances, and religion is one of the oldest examples there is of what should be done for us that would be better. How could we coexist? And there's many different ways to look at that particular example, and it's a really hard one to talk about. So if you take it with respect, and it's basically a cultural issue, right? The way I look at it, but other people may look at it as if, but it's a thing about belief. It's a thing about truth. And without going on to a long rant, if we're going to be proposing ideas that may be contrary or try to get into the layered onion or nuance of an idea, we state up front why we want to do that or why it's important. If we're into serious conversations, if it's just open chatter, then I'm not proposing anything. Right. Thank you.
Stacy, were you before me?
Yes, I was. I'm just going to say really quickly that you and I had started an exercise that I think would be very useful for everything we're talking about. Certainly in terms, somebody mentioned, I think Barry mentioned before, the easiest person to fool is ourselves. So the exercise that you and I did, I think, is instructional into seeing how I myself speaks and thinks, but also the other exercises, go towards conversing with other people. And I hope we pick that up at some point. I do want to continue that. I'm complete.
Okay, let me embellish what Stacy was saying, because either last week or the week before, Stacy and I reviewed a one-on-one session that she and I had together. And we went back, and not only did we try to watch that again individually, but we also worked on the transcript itself and said, was any of this stuff that I said incorrectly or won't stand behind or I don't believe anymore or, whatever. So, we both reviewed the transcript to at least come to a position that says, yes, what is represented here was what I truly represent. I stand behind it. I'm willing for that to be on the record as something that represents my thought, at least for that moment in time. What Stacy is saying is if we each do that for every one of our appearances in a video or at the mall or in class or in a relationship, whatever, we're constantly doing that, we would get to a much more solid foundation of who we are, what our values are, what our ideas are, what we're saying. I mean, I'm embellishing, on what you're saying, Stacy, but I'm just sort of expanding a little bit on it. So I think that's actually a great practice, because one of the things that is a problem or has been stated as a problem with all these videos and recordings is, hey, some people are not thinking very carefully about what they say, so they might change their mind. They might have been speaking incorrectly. They may not be using full sentences. Other people parse those sentences, differently, whatever, okay? Which is why I say it's useful to still have that, because if you see yourself doing that, maybe the next time around, you'd probably take a little bit more care in what you're going to say or how you come across. And over time, perhaps, you don't even have to do this because you know that when it comes out of your mouth, you're already ready to stand behind it. So that's my way of embellishing what Stacy just said. My second point is something I want to get back to, which is another thing that Stacy just said about 5 or 10 minutes ago, which is, and I put this in the context of co-visioning, okay? If Stacy says, what is our objective in the penal system, okay? Is it to punish someone or is it to reform them? I'm saying there's a bigger goal in mind. We want a peaceful society. And the goal of quote unquote this punitive system is to make a peaceful society more possible, more probable. So it's not necessarily in the context of that particular individual. Whereas if you only looked in the context of that individual, you'd have a whole different set of practical mechanisms, values, enforcement mechanisms, costs, etc. But if you look at it in the context of the entire society, you'd make your decisions very differently. How much do we want to spend? What is the rate of recidivism? What is the rate of reform? What is the cost of punishment? What is the cost to the rest of the society when this person is let out without reformation? Blah, 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 right? All of those are much more important than, are we going to do one thing or another to this individual? It's a social issue. And maybe even that's not the paramount goal. Maybe the paramount goal is thrivability for eons. Maybe peacefulness doesn't give us that. I don't know. I can't prove it. Maybe the existence of sociopathic or psychopathic elements in our society give us strengths that we don't value in a peaceful society. It's one thing we heard in elementary school, which we'd like not to believe, but as a scientist, you have to hold that hypothesis open. So anyway, I just wanted to respond to your comments about reform versus punishment and bring this perspective. So to me, just to wrap up, co-visioning is not all of us lining up around one goal. Co-visioning is us saying, what do I care about? What is the goal that I'm trying to achieve? And how does that fit with what everybody else is trying to do? So Barry can be working on, control feedback mechanisms and mechanics, okay? You can be working on interpersonal, relations. Other people can be working on art. Other people can work on making elections more fair. And yet we can sort of see how that tapestry connects together and makes sense together, okay? So when I say co-vision, I'm gonna say, here's where I'm gonna play in this larger tapestry. That to me is co-visioning. Over.
Can I respond?
Please do.
So I want to continue with the example you're using, because the significance to me between finding out punishment versus reform is I would suspect that those people that are interested in punishment are not going to be interested in that bigger peaceful position. So they're not the ones that I want to sell the idea to looking at all those other factors that you already spoke about. That's going to clog the conversation, and it's going to clog the ability for projects to move forward that would be looking at the costs and all those other things you mentioned. So to me, that's the importance of knowing on that very basic level where somebody is. The second thing I wanted to just go back to the exercise and just really quickly say that there's a second and a third part of those exercises that then, the second part was going back and looking to see if there was anything that you said that I didn't really understand fully, or that seemed contradictory, because, every sentence I say, there's at least two ways that it can be taken. So that goes for when I'm speaking it, I may not be thinking of the other way it could be taken, or when I'm listening to it, I may only be hearing it one way. I just wanted to.
Thank you for filling that. I didn't mention that, and you're entirely right. In fact, let me support that a little bit more. I cannot predict whether one word that I use is going to trigger somebody.
Right.
There's no way I'm going to know. That trigger may take that person's interpretation of what I said in an entirely different direction than what I intended. That's why the exercise that you proposed is a very useful one. Because that person, let's assume it's just you and me, and I get triggered, okay? I then say, well, this is what I heard when you said blah, blah, blah. There's no way you could have predicted that that would be my reaction. And yet to have that meeting of the minds together is very useful for that common understanding. And if we can learn to do this with most serious disagreements, we go a long way towards coexistence. Long, long ways. Maybe the entire way. Alex?
I've got a word called alert to use in place of the word trigger.
I love the word
Because-
trigger. Don't take that word away from me.
Alert is good.
That's, you've alerted me. I've been alerted to something, and somebody said something, and that alerted me. So now that I'm alerted, I have to respond to the group and let you know about that, because it helps to lubricate the wheels of the machinery. Over.
I appreciate this conversation. It's allowed me to say certain things that help me, at least, in my thinking. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Interesting moment of silence here.
I'm just waiting to see if Kayla or somebody else wants to say something before.
Kayla, are you looking at a spreadsheet?
Right now, I'm looking at a message of a girl get together, a woman get together. And I was reading, I have tons of beer and tons of White Claw and chips and stuff. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I need it.
I didn't get that email.
To you guys.
Darn it.
I'd like to be able to chocolate coat my popcorn, but I need a machine to do that.
I think Barry had something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate a bit on what Sam had said maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago. I don't think Sam and I are very far apart.
Right.
And the only advantage I have over Sam is that I've written some think pieces that I've published that have already sort of captured what Sam is bringing up kind of off the top of his head today. And one of them was inspired by my appreciation of what we learned from being on the internet. Because I remember Sam and I sort of maybe not grew up with the internet, but came of age as the internet was coming of age. And I identified 5 stages of advancement of sophistication that I observed in the development of the internet. So you start off with something that I'd simply called a heap of rules, just a list of rules in no particular order. And these, you have to obey these rules. It's a heap of rules. Games, children's games are a classical example. And then a word that I learned pretty early in life, but I didn't really know what it meant, was this word protocol. It was typically used, in government. And I didn't learn how the word protocol was used really until we had the internet, because the internet is protocol based. So the internet has a suite of protocols. It took me a long time to appreciate how did they build the internet out of a suite of protocols. What's the difference between a protocol and a rule? That was sort of a subtle but important distinction. And then I realized that what's in the protocols, among other things, are functions. I mean, literally mathematical functions. And so you have this library of functions. And by the time you get to functions, you're getting pretty sophisticated in terms of mathematical concepts. And then the next level up, and this is when I started studying systems theory, was the notion of a model. And we have collections of models. So this 4th level is this thing that I would call a collection of models. And then the last thing, which I really got from Bateson, Nora Bateson and Gregory Bateson and his cohorts, were the notion of an ecology of systems. So you had a heap of rules, a suite of protocols, library of functions, collection of models, and an ecology of systems. I thought this is a really nice progression. And the problem is that most people are kind of living in the heap of rules domain, and they don't really think about these higher levels. And so what I've been trying to do is sort of, raise consciousness about elevating our thinking up from these sort of kindergarten level heap of rules up to this graduate level ecology of systems. And also when Sam said punishment, reform, or question mark, I would put in for question mark, educate. So if you have a misadventure, something goes haywire, you go, oh, we don't want that to happen again. We want to regulate that so it doesn't occur. And the choices are punishment, reform, or educate. My question is, which treatment would you prefer to receive in the wake of a misadventure? Go ahead, Stacey.
I would say that a combination of all three would be the most useful. I mean, and I think that, there are, the people that would go for punishment, the reason they think that is they see that as a possible future deterrent. And there's some legitimacy in that. Just think about, think about anything you do in life. Like sometimes you're like, I'm just going to do it anyway, because what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to get a $5 parking ticket, big deal. So there has to be some there. I don't know. Yes, I do believe it. I'm just thinking if I'm believing what I'm saying. I do think there needs to be a combination of all three in life. I'm not just talking about prison sentences. If I don't burn my finger when I touch the fire, what's going to stop me from touching it again?
It's interesting about punishment because Martin Luther King and Mohandas Gandhi intentionally violated the laws. And they weren't the first, but they were sort of the most prominent in our lifetime. And they knew that they were going to get punished by the legal system. And they engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience, and received violence from the government as a reaction. And part of the reason that they did that is they wanted to reveal the violence of the government. So if you want to live in a nonviolent culture, you have to say, where's the violence coming from? And it turns out, if you do the sociology and the criminology, most of the violence in the culture is state-sponsored violence under the color of law for the purpose of enforcing the rules. And the notion that we should have state-sponsored violence under the color of law for the purpose of enforcing the rules is a belief. I won't call it a religious belief, but it's like a religious belief. It's a cultural belief. And people adopt it, and sociologists and criminologists say, is that belief well-grounded? And the modern sociologists and criminologists have concluded that it's counterproductive, it's iatrogenic and counterproductive. It seeds criminal violence, non-government violence, that violence by the government introduces the concept of violence as a regulatory mechanism in both directions. And so on the long term, it's counterproductive. And that's a very hard lesson, a very hard idea to introduce into a culture that's been using state-sponsored violence under the color of law for 5,000 or 6,000 years.
So I agree. I love that summary, Barry. The thing I'd like to go back to is in this choice where it's punish, reform, or something else. Those are suckers' choices. Anytime you think that your number of options or number of choices are limited to those that have been presented to you, then you've chosen to not use an imagination to co-create a new option. Now, obviously, there are cases where you only have a couple of choices, and otherwise the consequences are too dire. But in most cases, you can co-create multiple, if not a single, but probably multiple additional other options, especially in the area of relationships and communication, and even collaboration. So to take a look at the number of choices one is presented and feel like you have to select from one of those is an default opt-out of using your imagination. I think we should be aware that those are lost opportunities. That's where we can really get co-creative. We can really conceive something new that didn't exist before. And that's where we can truly change the way we be and do, and therefore what the future then looks like. over.
Can I just mention that there was a link that appeared on one of my websites that after closer examination, I found it was put there by Barry. And it was on my links plus page where I was in fact encouraging people to add links there. So thank you, Barry, because that link you left there leads to a tremendous amount of information at your blog site. That was great. Thank you. Collaboration.
Stacy?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I take back what I said about punishment. And I think the word I would put there, or the phrase I would put, is a limitation on choices for a specified period as being a consequence of not having made good choices.
And if I can elaborate, because I added educate as one of the question marks where Sam had left 2 question marks. Educate doesn't necessarily mean classroom education in the classical teacher student, because before we invented the classroom model, most education was through storytelling. Cultural storytelling was the major way that children were educated into the culture. And storytelling includes not just narrative storytelling, but art and plays, all kinds of artistic ways of presenting information in an entertaining but educational manner. They call it edutainment. And my feeling is that our education system needs to make much more use of storycraft and drama and the arts as a intentional mechanism to educate, not just your modern classroom model. Yeah, storycraft. And I observed that one of the things that I didn't learn in my 25 years of public education, I did not learn the art of storycraft. I was on the receiving end of a lot of well-crafted stories. History is stories, and English, we read a lot of novels and stories, but we never really learned the art of storycraft, except maybe if you go into the fine arts or something. And my feeling is that I would have been a much better science educator if I had mastered the art of storycraft much earlier in life. I would love to have learned how to write allegories and parables and fables and fairy tales and this other kind of education that was basically in children's entertainment. I would have loved to have had developed some skill in that 40 years ago.
This is a little off topic, but this is really what consumes my mind. So like even yesterday, I've been watching a lot of Netflix, and I think the shows are hysterical. I mean, like, I love what I'm watching, but I'm looking at the characters and I'm like, wow, these people are really flawed. And I'm wondering, is the audience thinking that that's what you should, like, you know, that that's acceptable? And in terms of teaching, and I've said this to you, I know privately before, Barry, I would love to be able to take a clip and then use that to have people discuss, whether they be children or older people, discuss, and actually telling our story in the context of discussing another story.
Yeah.
And I think that's very useful, even more useful than writing your own.
Yeah.
Is to speak it as it connects to something else.
When did storytelling become something that people generally, or society generally, thought was less educational? Because the communities that I've been involved with are all about storytelling, you know. And the funny thing is, yes, you can elaborate with truth, but that doesn't make the general idea of the story or the general story itself less true.
Right. Yeah, I used to say fiction is a great scam. You get to tell the truth while pretending to lie. And the great storytellers wrote fabulous fiction, which introduced great deep truths in the guise of a fictive story. To answer your question, Kayla, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution around the middle of the 1800s, where they wanted to start educating children to become workers in the industrial age, that's when they invented, at least in America, and I think so much in Europe too, the classroom model. Classroom model is pretty new, at least the way we have it in America. And they introduced that as an alternative to your classical story, moral storytelling. And it basically pushed the storytelling model out the window into the margins.
I have to think that some of that has to do with a male-female dynamic because, women tell stories all the time. That's the way we communicate. And the way we taught children through fairy tales and stories. And I know the other thing I had told Barry when I met him is that Mary Poppins was my mentor. And I will just quote, "In every job that must be done, there is an element of fun. You find the fun and snap, the job's a game."
Right, exactly.
If you love what you're doing, you never work a day in your life.
This is true.
But to Kyla's point about the storytelling, there's a situation arises where somebody with an agenda to push starts off by telling stories, conveying the idea through storytelling. And there's also in the scientific world, the idea that one example does not equal a trend. So if these single examples come up in storytelling, they can be so elaborate and convince the listener that it's a solid foundational idea, where in fact it's not. So that's where the storytelling rubs up against factual scientific basis for the idea. One example does not equal a trend. Storytellers will love to use one example and try and make it look like it is factual and it works every time that way, but it doesn't have to. It doesn't necessarily, not without scientific scrutiny. But storytelling is good for conveying general ideas, especially to listeners who are lacking those general ideas. Children, education, places like that. Albert.
Yeah. Sam will recall my favorite quote from Umberto Eco: "Wherever we cannot express a theory, we must tell a story instead."
Stacy, to your point about television and Netflix too, I would completely agree. And just to kind of add to that too, I mean, television is kind of glorified too, and has just put our values out of the window. I mean, not everybody is a size 0 on television or in real life. Whereas the camera, has to have it a certain way because it's more appealing to the eye. Or telling a story, for instance, about kids in the ghetto. I mean, I love those stories because it's fascinating, the hardships that they went through and like some of the very famous hip hop artists, all of the trauma and the things that they've gone through, but the glorification of the things that they did are conveyed through their story and on the big screen and glorified as something that's cool. While it's kind of like it's great to see a person overcome that, where is it where people think that it's cool to shoot up a store or to murder or wear colors, or that's where it just kind of, I get confused with the whole television and storytelling thing.
Yeah.
At the risk of distracting the conversation, I got to talk about one of my pet peeves. For decades, I've never liked it when my kids watch Disney movies. I try and dissuade them from watching Disney movies. Even Disney shows on the Disney Channel. I almost can't, with no exceptions. It always seems like the parents in these TV shows on the Disney Channel are idiots, bumbling fools. They always depict the parents in this way, you know? And I think that's not a good way to reinforce relationships within families when this is what you're choosing to pander to simply because your audience is children. You know, I really dislike that about the Disney Channel. And in fact, you look at the movies, you know, so many of the adults are cruel. Cruella de Vil, even named cruel, you know? And how many kids in Disney movies were born of families that did not have both parents? I can't think of very many movies in Disney genre where both parents are there.
Bambi.
And in a sense, you know, function. No, Bambi only had her mom, right? Is that true?
I think her mother died. Remind me, did Bambi's mother die?
Didn't Bambi's mother get shot by a hunter? Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it starts.
This is
No, I
going
think
down.
Bambi's an orphan. Yeah, I think Bambi's an
But anyway, that's a pet peeve of mine. This is what's been feeding generations and generations of American children who unfortunately are now adults. They get all of this, you know, decades and decades, hundreds, thousands of hours in their psyche. And that's just one source. That's one of my pet peeves. There's other sources too. Others.
Yeah, there's a girl I knew years ago who pronounced the word adults. She pronounced it dolts, as if it's spelled D-O-L-T-S. And that was very, very intentional.
Not only Disney that has violence in children's cartoons. There's a lot of it even in Japanese cartoons and other cultures.
Roadrunner.
See, I wouldn't see a problem in any of these things if it were followed up by discussion with people that, you know, with your family. If you're watching it together with your family and then you discuss it, then I don't see a problem. The problem is that doesn't often happen, especially when you don't have those two parents.
Now, if you discuss them, you're discussing, the kids these days would be discussing them with parents who also grew up with those very same movies. And that's already deep within their psyche.
But I guess I'm looking at it as discussing, like, do you see me like that? When? When do you, you know, or, you know, why do you think she did that? Or, you know, I mean, it's just interesting when you look at something that you're not related to, and you're looking at it with a group. Everyone in the group has something to offer about the perspective they're seeing. And everybody in the group gets to share the other person's perspective, and that's how they blend and you get a fuller picture. I think that's the goal, the fuller picture with the more points added to it.
I think parents tend to want to cotton wool the children quite often. Some parents have a hands-off approach, which is a different way of parenting. But, you know, in the animal world, there's cruelty and savagery, and lions getting caught by crocodiles and antelope getting eaten by lions. And children are watching all this on YouTube, so they're fully informed, most of them that watch YouTube or Facebook. I know that
Look any rules.
humanity's got some vile things, you know, political interference in other countries' elections is a pretty atrocious thing to do. Atrocious, bad behavior. Over.
Yeah.
So just to put on the record, I myself found a shift within the way I parented between my older daughter and my second daughter. Up until my older daughter, I did exactly what Alex was talking about. I said, hey, you know, the world's a tough place. It's a mean place, you know, deal with it, learn it, face it. You're going to have to sooner or later. It was the, you know, tough love kind of situation. I am taking actually a very different role with my youngest daughter. I find that I no longer believe that's the right way to represent the world. So with her, I've really actually been trying to say, how would you like to see people behave? Sorry about this. So I have a call coming in. Sorry, I'll interrupt myself later.
Okay, I couldn't tell if that was yours or mine.
Barry, you might know the answer to this question. It was, I don't know if it was called like the blue code or the blue law, whatever it was in movie
laws.
making. So was that in early movie making, how like the bad guy had to die?
Yeah, okay, so you're talking about the blue code in the movie industry. See if I can remember what that was, but
I thought it was basically like somebody who had done something, you know, bad. They have to have a bad ending.
yeah, it basically couldn't be morally inverted. The
Right.
moral of the story had to be something that was morally supportable. So yeah, you couldn't really have the villain win.
So I remember thinking that, wow, that's terrible. And now I look back and I say, wow, I wish we had that now, because that's, to me, you know, it seems like what I see, and maybe I'm wrong, it seems like people are creating things to show all the bad things we do. But I feel that it has the opposite effect, because I think it's actually modeling that bad behavior. And I don't think that's the original intent, but I think that's what happens.
Yeah, storycraft is a tricky business because you want the audience to pay their fee to see the movie. And what the audience wants to see maybe not be the message you want to deliver. You know, people are much more likely to buy a ticket to go to a horror movie or a movie with violence than they're going to buy a ticket to go listen to a sermon. So yeah, you have this challenge, like how do you tell a story that has a moral without it sounding like you're paying to listen to a sermon? Yeah,
$300 million and he creates something like the Avatar movie.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching. I watched all of Lucifer to date, which is 5.5 seasons. And so here the star is the devil, right? His character represents the devil, and he's working with a police detective. So it's a really kind of interesting combination. But you know, Neil Gaiman says, you know, no matter what happens, no matter what terrible things are happening in the real world and in your life, make good art. And he's illustrating his concept of making good art. Certainly good entertainment. And you know, it's all about, they got a psychologist that's in the script, and the psychologist is there mainly to provide the interpretation of the theory of mind, because the characters are going to do really dumb things. And so first they go in to see Dr. Linda, and they sort of reveal, you know, where they have a neurosis and they're not sure what to do. And Dr. Linda is basically there for the audience to explain the psychology of the character so the audience will understand. And then the session fails and the character goes out and does exactly the wrong thing. But it's kind of a clever use of, you know, of a psychologist to reveal the screwed up theory of mind of the character and why they don't learn better.
Yes, if you never made any errors, you wouldn't learn much. So go out and do it. If you if you want to succeed in life, you've got to have a go. You know.
Yeah. The question is whether we learn from our mistakes. That's the hard part. You can learn that something isn't working, but that doesn't mean that you can figure out what to do differently that is going to work.
It's a matter of probability. We have these scientific ways of analysing systems. We think of the probabilities of something working, and then we have our risk assessment. Sorry, Stacey.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just gonna say that, you know, sometimes we learn a piece and we try again, but there was a different piece that we didn't have, so we try again. So I know with like substance abuse, sometimes it takes people 6, 7 times before they finally get it.
Yeah.
But that's okay, because each time they got something more.
Even a Nobel Prize winning scientist who's trying to figure out something with as much precision as possible, and this is due to Linus Pauling, who got the Nobel Prize in chemistry, he said in his experience, the first 19 ideas that come to mind work. The 20th idea out of 19 finally is the idea that works. And so you're wrong. You know, the first thing that comes to mind, the first 19 things that come to mind are going to fail. And that's just an empirical observation among the best scientists, Nobel Prize winning scientists.
And the other challenge is conditions for each time change. So you might take everything you learned and try to apply it and not realize that a certain condition has changed. So the whole equation's thrown off.
Yeah, if the system changes, the model has to change. If you can keep the model in sync with the system, then you can keep the solution to the model in sync with the feedback loop. Because as the model evolves, the function inverse of the system model goes with it. If you have a fixed set of rules, the rules become obsolete because the model has changed.
I think I understand.
You sure you guys aren't software developers?
I was learning guitar, and I found that one day I had a exercise. It was a scale. I learned the scale, learned to play it backwards and forwards, and become fluent with it. And not long after that, I was going through my songbooks, and I found that I could play several of the songs I couldn't play before. And it was like a whole branch of this tree was starting to blossom. The tree of music over.
Music theory is pretty complicated. There's a presenter, British presenter named Howard Goodell, good something. And he had a BBC series on the theory of music, which you can still find on the internet. It's up on my blog, in fact. And it's like a 4-hour series. And I've watched like 4 or 5 times because it's such a fabulous introduction to music theory. And I never would have figured any of this stuff out just by listening to music. This is so far beyond anything I could have figured out on my own. It's ridiculous.
Well, it's 22 minutes past the hour. I got a lot out of this conversation, even though it wasn't touching on any of the prepared thoughts that I had brought to this particular conversation specifically, although in general, it did tie together a lot of the larger concepts, especially the pillars. So I thank each of you. With that, I'm going to check out. You guys are welcome to hang on, as long as you like.
Yeah, I have to go too. I have to eat. I really enjoyed this conversation though, and I thought the flow was really nice.
Thanks for letting me listen. I enjoyed it as well.
Okay, goodbye.
Later.
Nobody else wants to check out? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Sold to the lady in California.
Thanks, Sam.